arrived. So very warm welcome to all of you. First of all, a very warm welcome to our panelists. We are pleased to have you here to discuss together on our today's subject. Hello also to our audience. We're very happy to welcome you here. The panelists, dear colleagues here, dear participants of the SLE, and dear postgraduate students by the Heinrich-Böll Foundation. A very warm welcomes to the 20th EPDT, which means the Development Policies Discussion Days organized by the SLE and the Heinrich-Böll Foundation. It's a cooperation that celebrates 20 years of existence. It's an anniversary that we're very proud of, because it is not normal that corporations or continue in the same format for such a long time. There must be a real vital interest in it. As for the audience, we have increasing numbers of participants, and in the framework of the Berlin evaluations, we are ranked as one of the top political events that takes place at an annual level. So that is very important. We need to prove that the audience is interested, that it is technically and as for the content very interesting. At the same time, we cannot earn money with this kind of events, but we still have a certain interest in this invest. And I'll talk to you about this subject in detail. First of all, we have a training objectives. One of them, the Heinrich-Böll Foundation follows this training objective as for the SLE, and as myself, as the director of EPDT, we want to make sure that the young people, the postgraduate students who enter this sphere, the political career of development policies, will be prepared thanks to the organization and the planning of such a panel. Learn how to lead debates, to moderate debates, to choose the experts, to set up a very exciting and technically interesting debate so that the issues discussed at such an event will approach their solution. And that is the overall objective that we pursue. So what makes this format so successful? And it's very important to point that out. It is a very young format, and it is not the older ones who dominate these kinds of high-ranking panel discussions. This is what I really like. And I think we can learn a lot from it, meaning me, myself, and the other older ones, because these kinds of panels change with a lot of tools that enter the discussion, such as videos and maybe other points of view, other attitudes that were marginalized in the past, higher diversity, which is great that we welcome. And it is also made possible thanks to the digital format of this event that permits the participations by people from all over the world. So it is also possible that people can participate in their language, and it's really great, meaning that we have less barriers of access to this kind of panel discussion. What else can I tell you about the 20th anniversary of EPDT, the Development Policy Discussion Days? How can you continue to talk about rural development for more than 20 years? Look at the subjects that we're looking at. Look at it closer. We always have current subjects that are highly high ranking and on top of the current political agenda. My colleague has prepared a word cloud. There are certain subjects that are discussed during our discussion days, such as climate protection, disaster prevention, fight against crisis, sustainable use of resources, environmental protection, fair trade, etc., private sector, a green economy, etc., etc. All these subjects and others are continuous themes and topics, but under these global terms, we focus on certain sub-subjects. For example, the new due diligence laws are discussed today, the approaches to policies in order to overcome the bad situation that we observe. There are continuous efforts in the political fields that we have to highlight. There is a hugely controversial debate. How can you formulate, detail these political debates, and in the end also implement these ideas? We're very idealistic in this way. We want possibly the best policies that pursue the most sustainable goals, and the SLE has upset a transformation agenda in this context, and this how to implement all this. This is what we will be talking about today. Development cooperation is the overall focus and the sense of this debate, as we are talking about the North-South cooperation. Of course, we have a regional focus, which is Sub-Saharan Africa. Why? Because development policies concern mostly the cooperation with Sub-Saharan African countries. In the center, as I've just mentioned, there are current debates that are very much oriented on the solutions that we're looking for. We are talking about solutions in order to increase a sustainable fair trade. Yesterday we debated on energy partnerships between Europe and the African countries on the basis of the European grain teas, and afterwards we've talked about the digitalizations of smallholder farming. All these subjects concern long-term issues, at the same time new policies that are very strongly on the agenda at this moment. This is all what I wanted to tell you, and right now I would like to hand over the floor to our moderators, Lena Goma, Deborah Calais, and later on Ruth Meissner, who will moderate the questions and answers. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Susanne. Hello and welcome also on behalf of the entire organizing team. My name is Lena Goma, and together with my colleague Deborah Calais,
good morning,
I will be moderating this panel discussion today under the title, The Emperor's Fair Clothes, Are Labels and Due Diligence Key to More Sustainability? Before we start, first of all, my colleague Ruth Meissner, who will moderate the audience questions, will give you some technical notes. Ruth, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you very much. A very warm welcome also from my side. I'm happy to share some technical information with you. So as you might know, this panel will be held in English, but we have a simultaneous translation to German. Das bedeutet, wenn Sie diese Podiumsdiskussion auf Deutsch verfolgen möchten, dann nutzen Sie dazu bitte den Weltkugel-Button, den Sie unten in der Zoom-Toolbar finden. Dafür brauchen Sie einfach kurz über den Webinar-Seite, hovern Sie einfach über den Bildschirm und können unten auf die Weltkugel klicken.
Just click on the globe button at the bottom of the screen.
So if you want to take part in German, please use the globe to switch between the three channels. which is the original sound, English or German. As you can see, we also have a live transcript activated. You can use the button CC to activate those closed captions in English. Please note that those are automatically created and therefore faulty transcription is possible. Later today, we are going to use the software Menti to engage our audience in a survey. So if you want to take part in this audience survey, please visit the webpage www.menti.com and insert the code from the chat you can see there later. The chat is another option you find in the toolbar. It is the button with the speech bubble and you can receive messages there from our organization team. But please note it's only one directional. So if you have questions and you want to ask us, please use the Q&A section. If you use the German Zoom webinar, this button is called F&A, Fragen und Antworten. In this Q&A sections, you can pose questions addressed to our panelists. Please remember to state also to whom of our panelists you are referring your questions. We are looking forward to them because later today I am going to ask those questions in our Q&A sessions. And you have the possibility to thumb up, to like the questions with a voting system. So just have a look in the Q&A sections to see, to vote them. Lastly, I want to bring to your attention that we would love to get a feedback from you. So later today, we will post a link in the chat for an evaluation survey, and we would be very happy to get your feedback. So far with technical information. Back to you, Lena Goma.
Thank you, Ruth Meissner, for the introduction of the technical features. I would like to now give you a brief overview of what to expect over the next 2 hours. The aim of our event today is to discuss the effectiveness of certifications and due diligence laws to avoid social costs, environmental damage along the whole supply chain. First of all, I will introduce our panelists. Afterwards, we will show an input video introducing the topic and key terminology. Then we will come to the core part of today's event, the panel discussion, which is divided into 2 blocks. The first round of discussions focuses on existing instruments to improve the sustainability of supply chains and their blind spots regarding human rights, environmental destruction, and distribution of power. In the second round, we want to explore alternative ways to achieve sustainable supply chains. Throughout the event, you, the audience, are also able to participate actively. On the one hand, there will be short surveys that Ruth already mentioned before and after the discussion. And on the other hand, there's also a session dedicated to your questions for the panel in the last third of the event. So don't hesitate to post questions in the Q&A section throughout the whole event. Now that you know the plan for today, I'm very happy to be able to introduce our esteemed panelists and invite them all to turn on their videos on so that they join us on stage. Welcome to all of you. Great to see you. I would like to first introduce Ms. Anosha Wahidi, who is joining us from Berlin, Germany today. Ms. Anosha Wahidi is a lawyer and heads the division on sustainability in global value chains at the German Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development. In that position, she has made major contributions to the draft law on due diligence in value chains. Under her leadership, the ministry also established the textile label Grüner Knopf, or green button in English, which is the first label to assess systematically human rights due diligence, as well as guidelines for sustainable procurement of textiles for the German Federal Administration. Thank you for joining us today, Ms. Wahidi.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. Thank you, Ms. Goma and Ms. Calais, for organizing.
Next, I would like to introduce Ms. Reema Nanavaty, who is joining us from Gujarat in India today. Ms. Nanavaty leads the Self-Employed Women's Association, short SEWA, the single largest union of informal sector workers, providing full employment and self-reliance to its 1.7 million members. With her focus on women's economic empowerment, she has built women-led supply chains in various sectors, including textile and garmenting. Ms. Nanavaty is recognized across India and globally as a champion in ensuring that poor women's livelihoods reach the markets they deserve. She was a member of ILO's Global Commission on the Future of Work, and her efforts have created a more dynamic economy and a more just and equal society for SEWA members. If you want to get a visual impression of SEWA's work after today's event, you can also watch then the 2 videos posted in the chat. Ms. Nanavaty, it's so nice to have you with us this morning or this afternoon for you.
Good afternoon. It is my privilege and a pleasure as well. I look forward to the rich discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I would like to introduce Mr. Christian Schader, who is tuning in from Zurich, Switzerland today. Dr. Schader is an agronomist and leads the research group on sustainability analysis at the Research Institute of Organic Agriculture, short FiBL. He has more than 15 years of experience in evaluating social, economic, and environmental aspects of agricultural value chains. Mr. Schader was co-author of the SMART methodology for assessing agricultural production processes. His current research projects include the development of a sustainability evaluation tool for German food retailers, as well as the analysis of sustainability hotspots in cocoa value chains. Great to have you on the panel, Mr. Schader.
Thank you very much for the nice introduction, and thank you very much for inviting me.
Finally, I would like to introduce Mr. Aleix Busquets Gonzalez, who is connected to us from Brussels, Belgium. Mr. Busquets Gonzalez is Director of Global Sustainability at C&A, where he works since 2014. In this role, he oversees the implementation of C&A's global sustainability strategy, drives its European sustainability program, and ensures alignment with the brand's sustainability activities in Brazil, Mexico, and China. Prior to C&A, Mr. Busquets Gonzalez worked at Inditex for 10 years, where he gained vast experience working in supply chain management by leading the Inditex social compliance program. Thank you for following our invitation on completing this panel.
Thank you, everybody. Good morning and good afternoon, and looking forward for a very fruitful discussion. I think that we have an excellent panel here.
Yeah, we're also very happy to have you all with us today. For more information about our panelists, please refer to the handout in the chat. Now that you've met our panelists, we would like to get to know you, our audience, a bit better as well. We are very happy that up to now, already more than 150 participants have joined the event. As we can't get to know you in person, we would like to know more about your previous knowledge on the topic of our discussion today. Therefore, we have prepared a short survey with Menti. You can click on the link in the chat to access the question, or you can go to the website www.menti.com and add the code, which is also mentioned in the chat, and the numbers are 62372175. I hope you can all access the webpage now. And the question we want to ask you is, which methods do you know for a sustainable design of global value chains in cotton and textile production? You can tick several answers. The first one we provided is legal regulations or labels and certifications, such as the green button, for example, participatory guarantee system, short PGS, increased transparency using traceability approaches, or none of the above or others. So I'll give you all a few seconds of time to access the webpage and to choose the answers and the methods that you already know for sustainable supply chains. And now we can also already see the results. Thank you all for taking part in this short survey. As we can see, you're already familiar with some of the instruments, especially the certifications and labels. A good portion of you knows also legal regulations, you know, and also some of you also have heard of traceability approaches, while not so many have heard of participatory guarantee systems. If you were not familiar with any of the instruments beforehand, don't worry. Throughout the event, we have 2 inputs videos where the different instruments will be explained. Up next is the first input video introducing the key points on negative externalities, certification, and legal regulations. Enjoy.
Hallo, ich bin Luca.
Hi, my name is Luca. I'm interested particularly in sustainable fashion. Sometimes I'm not sure what the different labels mean and what the German government is doing to improve sustainability in the textile supply chain. Lucas heard about the new draft of a due diligence law the German government agreed upon in February 2021. As a result, companies based in Germany will be subject to a so-called due diligence obligation to ensure human rights and transparency along supply chains. Luca wonders, can the law deliver on what it promises? And what exactly do all the labels and certifications mean? This is a t-shirt from my wardrobe. I would like to know what impact the new due diligence law would have on local production. The cotton from Lucas's t-shirt comes from Burkina Faso. It is often grown in monocultures and is therefore very susceptible to pests. As such, large quantities of pesticides are used. This not only harms the health of the workers, the cotton pickers, but also reduces local biodiversity. But wouldn't the due diligence law apply here? In its current draft, only direct suppliers of German companies are affected by the due diligence obligation. In preceding steps of the value chain, substantiated knowledge of human rights violations is required, for example, in regard to the negative impact on the health of cotton pickers. However, the loss of biodiversity is hardly taken into account in the draft law, as it is not directly related to human rights. Furthermore, the cotton plant consumes an extremely high amount of water. For a 250-gram t-shirt, a total of almost 2,500 liters of water are used. That corresponds to 15 bathtubs full of water. This high water consumption is caused by intensive irrigation of cotton plantations. Possible consequences on site are a reduction of groundwater availability and the deterioration of the accessibility of potable water for the local population. This negative impact is called external effects or externalities. Uninvolved third parties of societies itself suffer from the negative consequences as a result of the behavior of individual companies. This is because the negative is affect not priced into the activities of the offending company. It therefore avoids incurring additional costs by not taking preventive measures to mitigate the external effects of its activities. This creates competitive advantages for individual companies, and the externalities do not reflect the final product price, but nevertheless are paid by society. So do labels exist to reduce externalities? The green button, for example, is a government label that encompasses general corporate, social and environmental standards in the supply chain. chain, sorry. However, the cotton cultivation stage is not covered in the current version of the green button. Instead, there is where the cotton made in Africa label comes in. Certified small-scale farmers commit themselves to complying with various social and environmental criteria in cotton cultivation ginning. One of these criteria is rain-fed agriculture. This means that no additional irrigation takes place on the fields and local water resources are therefore preserved. The cotton from cotton made in Africa is grown in a water-conscious way, but is not certified organic, since the use of pesticides is allowed. From here, the cotton travels to Turkey for processing into yarn and fabric, and then to China for dyeing. This often results in negative externalities, for example, when contaminated water is discharged into the river after dyeing, which not only hinders access to clean water for local population, but above all, affects their health. This is where the green button comes in. To protect people and nature, it includes a ban on hazardous chemicals and places strict limits on wastewater disposal during the dyeing and bleaching processes. The dyed fabric is then transported to Bangladesh for sewing and tailoring. Here too, the green button looks to guarantee human rights and ensure that workers receive the minimum wage as prescribed by national law. In Bangladesh, this was around €80 per month in 2018. However, this is not even half of what would be necessary to live at subsistence level. Labels such as the Fair Wear Foundation guarantee workers a living wage that allows them and their families to live in dignity. However, this label is limited to the production step of sewing and tailoring. It's quite difficult to keep an overview of the labels landscape. I wonder, what is the connection between certification and the due diligence law? While labels represent voluntary commitments by companies to comply with social and/or ecological standards, the due diligence law creates legally binding minimum standards. This draft of the due diligence law, however, with its active due diligence obligations, unfortunately only starts at the last trading step for companies with a direct contractual relationship. This becomes particularly clear when considering the last stages of the supply chain. Until the t-shirt is packed and transported to the destination country, it passes through the hands of numerous middlemen until it finally hangs in the shop and Luca can buy it. Up to this point, the t-shirt has traveled 18,000 kilometers in transport. The impact on the environment is enormous. According to the United Nations Environment Programme, the fashion industry is responsible for 10% of global CO2 emissions. That is more than the entirety of global air and sea traffic, and the trend is rising. The role of externalities in the production of a t-shirt is bigger than I realized. I never thought that there are such big gaps in terms of labels and due diligence.
So with this video on negative externalities, labels and due diligence laws, we hope to have you all on board. And we would like to kick off the discussion with an opening statement by our panelists. In keeping with the title of our event, The Emperor's Fair Clothes, we asked our panelists to bring a piece of clothing with them. Now we invite you, dear panelists, to show us your chosen item and elaborate in 2 to 3 sentences how this piece of clothing represents sustainable or unsustainable practices along the supply chain. Ms. Nanavaty, would you be so kind to start?
Thank you so much, and what a powerful video.
my heart was like throbbing so fast that, wow, you know, whoever has made this video. And what I'm holding is a piece of very traditional embroidery that the craftswomen that I organize, they do it. And this is very, very sustainable as the cotton is grown by the women themselves. It is hand spun and hand woven by the women in the villages itself. And then this is all freehand embroidery. The mirror that you can see is also brought and cut by women themselves. So it doesn't go into any factories, and therefore it doesn't travel thousands and thousands of kilometers. The dyeing is also done locally. It's all natural dyes using the pomegranate fruit skin and the pomegranate bark and the tamarind seeds. So that's why our brand is a very, very sustainable brand, but there's no way we can compete with the multinational brands, even though they travel thousands of kilometers. And that's where the unsustainability versus sustainability is the issue that I would really love to understand and discuss. Thank you so much.
So that was Ms. Nanavaty with a local piece from India. And I would like to hand over to you, Mr. Busquets Gonzalez.
Thank you. So here I have with me 4 years old jeans. So they had been maybe they had been washed 5-6 times. That's something also important to mention. You know, there's a consumer responsibility as well that we also have to acknowledge. These jeans are cradle to cradle, men's jean. And it's a showcase of the efforts that the industry is doing on reducing footprint in the supply chain. So what we're talking about is a product that has been designed with clear circularity principles. It only uses organic cotton, which comes from India, and which, as the video was saying, already represents 90% less of usage of blue water or fresh water. It doesn't use any harmful chemicals. There are also green chemicals in the market, so it can be used in green chemicals that do not have any negative impact on the environment. It's biodegradable. It has been produced in a factory in Bangladesh that complies with all the social and environmental standards, and is actually even cheaper than many other jeans that you can have. So it's an example of things can be done right or can be done wrong, and it has a lot of know-how in the back. And I think it's something that we could discuss today about, just like, you know, going a little bit more in details on the simple analysis that many people does in connecting, you know, big companies with just like greedy attitude. And it's something that I would be very interested to discuss today.
Okay, that was Mr. Busquets Gonzalez with his 4-year-old cradle to cradle jeans. Ms. Anosha Wahidi, would you show us your item?
Yes, thank you very much. And my item is right behind me. This is actually, I hope you can see it. This is actually from our kickoff event of the Green Button. And congrats again for the really excellent video. I can underline that it was very well researched. And I picked that t-shirt because it's certified. It's certified with the Green Button. And cradle to cradle, as Mr. Busquets was also referring to. And it's a good start. And maybe that's my main statement. It's not a perfect item. And I think it's very important in the discussion, in the upcoming discussion, to keep that in mind. We are far away from perfect when it comes to textiles and fashion. But my credo is imperfection is the new perfection. So we have to deal with certain imperfections within the supply chain, within products, but it's good that we have products on the market where companies show that they went through a very sophisticated audit process where the Green Button is state-owned. That means we are actually monitoring the businesses that are actually applying for the Green Button. And it's a first start. We are first covering tier 1 within the green button, but we are right now in the development phase. We would like to go deeper down the supply chain. But as I said, we need to start first, and we need a smart mix. These are my 2 buzzwords today, and I will use them a couple of times today, because there is no one-size-fits-all solution to all the problems. This T-shirt is one good start, but we need binding legislation as part of the smart mix. We need voluntary measures like the green button, but also multi-stakeholder initiatives and so on and so forth. So what I'm seeking today with the fellow panelists and with you is to find the perfect smart mix. How should that smart mix look like, and how can the consumer jump in? We are all consumers, the audiences and also the panelists, and Mrs. Calais and Gomer as well. I chose that one, that T-shirt, because it very much underlines that we started somewhere, and we should definitely be determined to get better each day and each week, month, and year. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wahidi, with a T-shirt with the green button label, but also voting for a smart mix, a combination of measures. Mr. Schader, I would like to finally hand over to you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think the textile I brought very well complements what was said earlier on. So this is my favorite jacket, and it's not an organic jacket, although maybe you would have expected me to bring an organic jacket. It's a jacket I bought 10 years ago, and it was quite an expensive jacket. I bought it just because I think it fitted very nicely. It's a business jacket, and I wear it quite often. And it is a very robust textile. That means, although I wear it very often, I also wear a lot of backpacks when I'm traveling. There is not a single scratch in this jacket. And I expected to wear this jacket for another 10 years at least, because it's really, I think I thought a lot about it because it was quite expensive, but it paid off by far. And I really like it a lot. I lost it also several times, and I got it back. And yeah, I want to emphasize with this that of course there is standards that we can employ. Of course there is I don't know, efficiency measures that we can take in order to improve environmental efficiency and reduce social impacts. But one important aspect, and there I think the main responsibility of consumers come in, is sufficiency. It's again, I want to make a statement against this fast fashion trend, that we produce and consume long-term things that last, and also maybe recycle things and buy secondhand. It's not the only measure, but it's something that is very important to emphasize here, because we consume much too much, and our textiles have a lot of impacts. And I have to admit, I don't know about the social standards this jacket complies with. I don't know even where the textile comes from, from which country. But I would also question whether we can burden the consumer with these questions, whether we should, the consumer should know in detail what were the production standards. I mean, I'm an expert in this, and we all have a lot of experts here, and it's my profession to deal with this. And I know a lot of people, my friends, also deal with this, but I would really question whether we can bother the ordinary people with it. So I really welcome the initiative, the recent initiatives in Germany, but also where I live in Switzerland. We have also initiatives that try to create a level playing field, which is mandatory for companies to fulfill. Thank you very much.
So Mr. Schader with his 10-year-old jeans emphasizing sufficiency. Thank you all very much for showing us your items and giving a first statement. In the input video and your opening statements, we learned about external effects and various instruments to address those external effects along the supply chains. Mr. Schader, you already jumped into the discussion here. Would you like to elaborate a little bit more if you, or from your experience at FiBL, are labels or the due diligence law efficient in avoiding human rights violation and environmental destruction?
Okay, you ask an economist whether it's efficient. So I would say from a policy evaluation aspect, it's not only efficiency that counts. We have to evaluate policies, private policies, but also public policies. Not only, I mean, first and foremost, we have to evaluate whether they are effective, whether we can reach the goals that we want to achieve. And if this is the case, we can ask what is the most efficient option and what is also the most acceptable option for the for society, because we need to take people on board, we need to take the companies on board, they need to agree, and it needs to be feasible for them, of course. So I would say effectiveness is the key question here, and I would say there is, of course, it's a step forward, but we are far from solving our problems with sustainable agriculture, sustainable food systems, sustainable development with it. But it's a step forward, and it's an important step. And I'm really happy that, in terms of acceptance, that we see a growing acceptance in the population and a growing political acceptance here. And, but in terms of efficiency, I really doubt that it's efficient. There are some reasons for this. There's this. We have a lot of transaction costs with it. It's quite difficult for companies to control, and the transaction costs are one element, and the other element is that the element of free rider problems that we have if we ask consumers to pay for public goods. This is economically not so much efficient, but it's a step forward.
Yeah, great to point out also the difference between efficiency and effectiveness again. Ms. Wahidi, you have worked at the political level, both on the label green button as well as the draft due diligence law. How do the two instruments complement each other, and what challenges remain in the textile sector?
Yes, thank you for the question. I think there are a lot of challenges still on the way. So, and again, my plea for a smart mix. I don't think that certifications are the silver bullet that most businesses are looking for. And the legislation itself alone, a standalone legislation without accompanying measures for businesses to comply with their due diligence, isn't a silver bullet as well. So what we need is certainly a smart mix. And this is where we came from BMZ, from the Ministry for Economic Cooperation Development. We came a long way, and it started off, and I'm very happy that Ms. Nanavaty is here today from India. We came from Bangladesh, from Rana Plaza, unfortunately. We have these horrible scenes and pictures still in mind. And this is what my minister actually has in mind when he talks about the textiles and fashion industry. Still, unfortunately, the fashion industry is part of the problem and not so much of the solution. And I think this is where we have to go. And that's why we started with the Siegelklarheit. That's a tool that gives consumers an idea of certification marks, like what do they stand for. We have a wild jungle of certification marks, and hardly no one knows what do they actually mean. What do they stand for? What does the green button actually mean? So for us, it's very important to first give orientation to consumers. That's where we started, but we also came up with a partnership on sustainable textiles, a multi-stakeholder initiative for businesses for peer learning aspect, for individual roadmaps that they have to come up with, and also for bigger initiatives on topics that one company alone, and that's my other lessons learned, cannot solve by itself. So we need to create a leverage for businesses in order to come together and work on a very important topic, like in India, for living wages, living income. extremely important topics, but one business alone, one state alone, a consumer alone cannot solve this problem. And afterwards, and then I come to the green button, I think the green button was the pave maker. It actually paved the way for a legislation, because for the first time we showed with the state owned certification mark that we have to keep in mind that the product itself, a certified product itself, for the consumer might be interesting to know that the product itself is sustainably produced. But for us, it was more important to first take a good look at the company that is actually coming up with the product in order to avoid greenwashing on the one hand. But on the other hand, if we have businesses that comply with their due diligence, and this is what we are first checking within the green button, then we can go further and check the product. I think that was key for us as well, that only a product certification won't pave the way to a more just or sustainable supply chain. And as you might know, and in the video it was already mentioned, beginning of March, our cabinet finally approved our draft due diligence law, and I'm very, very confident that we will get this law by this summer with a slight delay. I would have hoped that I could tell you today that we already passed cabinet, that we already passed the parliamentary process. It takes a bit more, a couple of weeks more, but I'm pretty certain that we will get there. And then I think we somehow started to complete the smart mix. And this was a main lessons learned and finding for us and parts of the German government, that voluntary measures alone didn't bring us to the goal of sustainable supply chains. As long as you don't have a regulation that sets, on the one hand, transparency in the supply chain for all businesses, and on the other hand, create a level playing field for all businesses, and that's what businesses ask us for. They actually came up to us and said, you are actually asked to come up with the regulation only if you complete that. I always speak of a puzzle, and these different measures should come together, then you will get there. So to finally answer your question, I think one instrument alone won't lead us to where we would like to be, to a more just and sustainable supply chains, but they're all it's an imperative to have all these tiny bits of pieces and measures in a smart mix.
So thank you. A combination of the due diligence law and the green button. You already addressed Ms. Nanavaty. In your direct experience with workers and buyers, what role do certification and the due diligence law play? Is there a positive impact for the members of your organization, SEWA?
Thank you so much. And I think this particular discussion is organized at a time when you all must be aware that, you know, in my state where I come, which grows almost 50% of the cotton in the country, and also is experiencing a surge in the second wave of COVID. And we were also hit by a very severe cyclone. And you know, it is in that time when the farmers, the women farmers whose livelihoods have been completely destroyed, that, you know, we are discussing about just and fair supply chains and sustainability. And I think, let me start by giving you an example of a small cotton farmer, and who said that she had to borrow 150,000 rupees to treat her husband for COVID. And they took him to the hospital in the nearby town, and despite spending so much money, they could not save him. And with the main breadwinner, the farmer in the family gone, she's now forced to mortgage either her home or her land to repay the debt, and or move with her children to her parents' home. Are the companies aware what the farmers are going through? That's my question. I do understand that why the consumers need to be burdened. We're not talking about burdening the consumers, but these are the cotton farmers from whom most of the brands, you know, procure either the material that's being made or, you know, the garmenting that's being done. but at least the consumers have to be educated and made aware that what is the reality, what is the situation of the workers who are working in the supply chain, be it the farmers, be it the spinners, be it the women working in the cotton gins who still hand pick the cotton pods and remove the seeds. Their hands have bristles and they bleed because of continuous shelling of the cotton pods. Either the governments contribute and the companies jointly contribute in improving the conditions of the workers and in educating the consumers. Definitely,
Nanavaty, sorry to interrupt you here, but you already actually addressed kind of a question to Mr. Gonzalez on the vision of companies. Would you like to react to that, Mr. Gonzalez?
I would like Ms. Nanavaty to finish her statement, and then we can continue the discussion.
That's okay. That's okay. I've done.
Okay. Well, then the question which we, Mrs. Kelly, what would be the question, like the proper question?
She was asking about how corporations are interested in what the farmers are going through. And yeah, I can also add another question onto that. And actually, I would also be interested in which initiatives you consider most effective in broader sustainability efforts by the private sector. And how do labels and the draft due diligence law affect business decisions at CNA?
I got the most complicated question. That's unfair. Let me bundle things, because I've heard very interesting things from the previous panelists, and of course, like everybody, one has its own ideas. I think that Mrs. Wahidi has said very interesting things. I think that I hope that we all understand that simple solutions are not realistic, right? I think we have previous examples of someone from, some leader from some country saying that building a wall between one country and another would be the way of solving problems of migration. And, that's not the way things work in reality. And it's important that we educate everybody that simple solutions usually are not feasible. And that complexity, unfortunately, it is part of what we're dealing in each of the aspects of our lives, including the area of garment production, let's call it this way, or textile production. So, but nevertheless, Mrs. Wahidi has said two things: that it's transparency and it's collaboration. And I think that in some shape or form, the level of transparency that certain, and again, it's difficult to just like say all, the garment sector, but certain companies have done in the past or in the recent years, it's admiring. Without praising X brands or Y brand, I think it's important to mention that 10 years ago, we hardly knew where the production was actually being made. And at the moment, we are able to trace a vast majority of the products until, the farmers are. And by doing this, we can acknowledge, understand the reality of the farmers that we couldn't do before because the lack of transparency and traceability. We can acknowledge that. We can also, let's say, weight our responsibility in all of the supply chain. Not at all under not accepting what our responsibility, but at the same time weighting it. It's not that we're not directly supplying to the farmers. Nevertheless, we also need to understand what is our percentage or level of responsibility. Please do not, and I'm a political scientist and I'm an economist, so I think it's the worst mix ever, because it gives too many headaches in that regard. But I think that we should not underestimate the ability and the capacity that governments, sovereign governments and sovereign states have, not only from the north, but also from the south because there are certain, and I think that, trade, it's an important element that we need to incorporate, and the power of organizations like, like the EU in how to manage, this relationship. It's a very interesting topic that usually stays in the side, and it would be interesting to put it on the front. As far as due diligence laws and other elements, I think that a mix of those are necessary. We have always been pushing for a due diligence law for the exact same element that Mrs. Wahidi was saying. That is, we need to level the playing field, avoid free riders, and getting, let's say, a kind of a starting point is important. However, I might say that all of the good things that Mrs. Wahidi has said that the due diligence law will bring, at the moment, they will only be brought by 82 million people. And it's a pity, because that same approach could have been pushed for 400 million people. And we understand that, the federal government of Germany, what wants is, let's say, to push the needle or to push the agenda on this topic, to be influential, let's say, on the European Union discussion. But the same will do Italy, the same will do France, the same will do Spain, and all of a sudden, until we will really have, let's say, an harmonized framework, we will have different laws with different mindsets, with different elements of compliance by companies, and it will be a complete nightmare for companies to really be able to apply in one single product all of the different elements. So fully agree that due diligence laws are needed. We have been pushing in that regard, and I think it's admirable that companies say, hey, yes, we really want a level playing field to avoid free riding effect. But let's be also smart, and in the 21st century, let's try to do a harmonized piece that helps all of the European citizens, and not only a few of ones that have, let's say, governments that really want to push the envelope in that regard. I don't know if it's too long, if it's too messy, but happy to come back to other questions.
Yeah, as you said, difficult questions. Thank you. You also mentioned North-South cooperation and relationship. We would actually shed some more light now on the distribution of power and profits. And therefore, I will hand over to my colleague Lena Guma again.
Yes, Ms. Nanavaty, I would like to address you right away, because you also in your introduction video talked about the local and the global supply chains and how those can come together, sustainability, but also the distribution of power and profit. So my question to you would be, how can we address this discrepancy you already addressed? How can SEWA members be included in those global supply chains? And yeah, what are your suggestions for that, or what do you already do to improve the situation of women in India?
Do I need to answer in a minute, or how much time do I have? So you don't have to cut me in between.
If you can be as brief as possible, but of course get your most important points in. If it's too long, I will give you a sign.
I may then pass the question. Please, I may pass the question. Thank you.
Okay. If you want to pass the question, then I understood correctly that you want to pass it to another panelist. No, not. Okay. Well,
sure.
Sorry if I misunderstood you. Maybe then you, Ms. Wahidi, you can talk, since you also already mentioned the importance of including all stakeholders in the supply chains. Maybe you can share some of the ideas that are being implemented in improving the livelihoods of local communities and including them in the value chains.
Yes, thank you for the question. Although I would admit that I would love to hear from Ms. Nanavaty and from India, from on the ground, because this is where the challenges are from our point of view. So, and an encouragement for Ms. Nanavaty to also give us your insights, because all the efforts that we're actually doing, at least at the Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, aims to foster the living and working conditions on the ground in producing countries. I've been to India a couple of times, and I very much appreciate the work of SEWA. We met, not me personally, but my colleague, we met some of your colleagues in India as well, and we very much appreciate this work on the ground. If we wouldn't have organizations like SEWA who give women a voice, oppressed women a voice, and give them good working conditions, I think the whole our whole work wouldn't make any not that much sense. But I would like to, before I start to answer your question, see Ms. Nanavaty, I just take my time. You just need to talk. You take your time. If you want to answer longer, you can definitely do so. I would like to address something to Mr. Busquets and then refer to your question. Of course, I very much underline your point that no fragmentation. We need a harmonized legal framework in Europe the best way. But on the other hand, and that's my lessons learned in the past 7 years, we cannot wait for another level. You can do one thing on the one hand, but also foster your own work in an area where you actually are engaged in. That means, in other words, if we hadn't the French law, the Loi de Vigilance in 2017, I don't think we would have been at that stage of discussions on a legal or binding framework. So it was an extraordinary push for the Commission. And then we came up with our Due Diligence Act. And I can assure you that the responsible EU Commissioner, Didier Reynders, is very much behind that legislative act that he is right now working on. And therefore, we also foresee a paragraph in our draft Due Diligence Act. It will start with its effects in 2023 for bigger companies. And we definitely foresee a EU regulation by, say, in 2 or 3 years, so that we can harmonize our law. And there is an evaluation clause within the Due Diligence Act that it does exactly this, that states that as soon as we will have an EU regulation that we will definitely push for, and we will definitely actively engage on EU level, then of course the German regulation will be overruled. And Ms. Gomez, to your point, I think that's cooperation is not only meant for businesses, but also for politics. So that means North and South. I hate the terms of global South and global North, because it starts a division that's actually not meant from our side, at least. We are all one world, one planet, and these are all our resources. So for the future generations, and your audience is a very young generation, and look at the latest, or I would quote the highest court in Germany, the Federal Constitutional Court, which actually recently overruled the Federal Climate Change Act for being incompatible with fundamental rights of the younger generation. So that means the younger generation in Germany, as well as in India and elsewhere. So that's what we have to definitely keep in mind. What we are doing as development actors, and I would like to point one thing out, we are working on reform partnerships very much since a couple of years. That means that we make disbursements dependent on performance in the so-called global South. And I think that's a good first approach to set incentives for countries to cooperate and to work on their legal frameworks as well. That's just one highlight of what we're doing. And again, a smart mix of other measures that are needed to complete the full picture. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for talking about those cooperations.
Then, Ms. Nanavaty, I'm really sorry I interrupted you earlier. I just thought you were addressing Mr. Gonzalez, and I wanted to engage in the discussion. Would you like to share some of your views with us now?
Please go ahead, don't interrupt the flow of the panel, that's okay.
Okay, well then I would forward the question to Mr. Busquets, because we also heard about the international cooperation and the importance of ensuring livelihoods, which is also, and the positive impact for workers, which is also part of the CNA agenda, and maybe also addressing a point that Ms. Nanavaty made earlier about the impacts on the local level that also the Corona crisis has caused the local workers. CNA was criticized for the treatment of workers in Bangladesh and other countries during the beginning of the Corona crisis, as payments for products were stopped and frozen, and many workers, like Ms. Nanavaty alluded to in her example earlier, had to fear the loss of their livelihoods and their employments. So I'm asking myself, how does that fit in with the CNA sustainability agenda? And that also brings up Ms. Nanavaty's question from earlier. Do big global players know what's going on, or how their decisions affect the people on the local level?
Thank you. Would you also, you're talking about March 2020, right? You're not talking about, okay.
No, because I was talking about the incidents at the beginning of the Corona crisis.
Right, so what happened, so it's a rhetorical question, but if in March 2020, we would ask any of our 167 participants right now, whether we would think that in May 2021, we would be in this situation, I think that nobody knew, right? So I think what happened in that moment was very stressful for everybody. And we did something that was legally needed for us. And then what we did back in November is we paid everybody that had been frozen back in March. So yes, it was true that there was a situation in March that we could not, let's say, comply with our obligations. So what we basically did is we froze our obligations until we were able to physically pay. And that was in October. So at the moment, you know, all of the contracts that were pre-Corona were granted, were paid, and there, let's say, there are all of the obligations as a CNA, as a company, were made. Some, you know, we could have decided, okay, well, that's the current situation, you know, that's something that happened in March 2020. We're not going to come back to that. It's just like, you know, river that has already passed, but absolutely not. We came back to the board with the suggestion that since we had a much more understanding of the current crisis and our current situation, that we would come back and make sure that all of the payments were granted, and that's what we did in November 2020. So it is true that in March 2020 we could not do that, but we did it in 6 months in delay, and we at the same time ensure that all of our suppliers paid their workers as they would have been working.
Thank you for that statement, Ms. Nanavaty. Would you like to react to that? Did SEWA members experience similar problems, or how did you tackle those challenges at SEWA?
We do not work with CNA directly, so I may not be able to comment on that at all. It's just that the workers are always at the very end of the supply chain. And I think there's in the chat also one question which is asking, why do farmers remain poor? And the reason is that, the farmers are not organized and they are not integrated into the value chain. I don't think any of the multinational companies procure their cotton directly from the farmers. It is all procured from the different ginners and spinners, and nobody knows where is the cotton coming from. And unless and until the farmers are organized, there's an aggregator, and then if the transparency and the different due diligence mechanisms are put in place. And that's what we believe in, that there has to be organizing of the farmers. There has to be a supply chain local, which is owned and managed by the farmers, by the women farmers themselves. And then only they could be integrated higher into the value chain. Right now, it is all a facade. That the companies from their CSR may be contributing in providing training to the farmers, in in decreasing the input costs and everything. But unless the farmer is able to really participate into the supply chain, the farmer still continues selling to the traders or to the middlemen. And even our own government is responsible for it, that it has to bring in certain regulations in place. We cannot blame the companies alone. So I think the answer is that unless and until you have the farmers organized, they have their own local decentralized supply chains, and the farmers themselves work as aggregators, then I think the due diligence would become more fair and just.
Thank you for sharing those valuable insights from India with us. So yeah, farmer-owned supply chains are key. Sorry, Mr. Busquets, you wanted to, I think, you didn't share all of the opinions, but I think in the second discussion round, we will have more time to also then talk about the needed transparency on all of these buzzwords that were already mentioned. But before jumping into that second round, we wanted to show another short input video introducing two other approaches to sustainable supply chains: participatory guarantee system and the traceability approach that was also already mentioned. So yeah, we will now watch the video and then can dive into the next round of discussions.
A participatory guarantee system is a system of mutual control which allows association of small-scale farmers to self-certify. Third-party certification often comes along with high costs as well as complicated standards, while participatory guarantee systems are indeed time-consuming but not cost-intensive, and therefore represent a low-threshold alternative. Furthermore, the ownership-based systems enable small-scale farmers to get to know new methods of farming through the regular mutual controls and increases the mutual trust.
Sawasdee krab. Good day to all. My name is Vitun Panyakun. I am the founder and currently also the executive director of the GreenNet in Thailand. Our PGS mimic the internal control system of the grow groups in organic certification. But instead of having third-party auditors and inspectors, we organize peer audit with other PGS groups in Thailand. This is done under the Thai Organic PGS Federations. The PGS itself has no direct value for farmers. It is just another guarantee tool. It is the organic production and fair trade that create benefit for them, such as better environment, better health, guaranteed price, and so on. The decision for us to adopt PGS is mainly to do with cost. With very small scale productions, 4 to 5 tons of lint per year from 40 or so producers, and we only sell the products in the country. Third-party certification, international third-party certification is not justified. I should stress that PGS does not by itself create benefit for farmers. It is the combined approach of organic and fair trade. Farmers are not just mere raw material producers, they are our business and environmental partners. The business grows slowly, and our financial is still not so successful, but we believe it will, hopefully soon. Thank you for listening. Sawasdee krab.
An additional instrument to improve transparency and trustworthiness of actors along the value chain is a tracing system. The idea is to digitally track the products from source to consumer, creating a feedback loop in the supply chain. Traceability can strengthen supply chain security through a better management of social and environmental risks, allowing quick reactions to emergencies. This process can also increase customer confidence. Finally, cotton producers obtain more control in the supply chain by having a better access to information in markets.
Business is to create value inside of the value chain by providing digital solutions. The idea behind this traceability system is the objective of orchestrating the value chain, which means creating value along the chain for every single actor. And a particular attention should be given to the smaller farmers, because if you look at the price of a t-shirt right now, the farmers who produce the cotton are paid only a very, very small part of it. So we have to create the incentive to these farmers, to make them in interest to produce cotton for these t-shirts. I think that the most important one is when you bring this issue of traceability on the table through the angle we brought it to the market, a way to again create value for every stakeholder along the chain, up to the consumer. When you bring it that way, then suddenly the traceability becomes a very, very important tool, because it creates the traceability that every single actor wants to have with the other ones inside the value chain. To address environmental damage, you must be able to measure environmental damage first. So our system is designed to measure, to trace any single activity along the chain, any operation along the chain, from production to the joinery up to the t-shirts. It's every single operation is traced, and every single operation is certified using the digital solutions that we have. And we do think that a way to really measure any risk and any damage, because you are talking about environmental wrong, based on facts, not about on certificate only, but on facts that everybody can measure, everybody can see, and everybody can trust.
So after watching those other approaches in the second input video, Mr. Schader, looking at the issues of sustainable supply chains that we already discussed during the first round of discussions, and now these other approaches that are introduced, how would you assess those other approaches? Do they help in making supply chains more sustainable, or what is your assessment of those aspects mentioned?
Yeah, I think the approaches that you showed are really in their sense helpful, and they let's say are a step forward, but they won't solve the problem for the reasons that were already mentioned also by the other panelists, that we if it's voluntary approaches, and they are quite also costly to implement, and they rely on the people who are willing to pay additional money voluntarily. And that's what I said. I think we need to have a different approach to this. But there were different things mentioned. There was this PGS approach, which is valuable, but I don't think this is, let's say, upscalable, because it's very difficult also to communicate such things to consumers as well. We are working a lot in Africa and in India with smallholder farmers, and we also work with this internal control systems, which is trying to reduce the cost for smallholder certification, but still have a certification. So not all single smallholders are certified, but the entire system is certified as an internal control system, and then it can be certified. I think this is a better option in the sense that it can be better clearly communicated to the consumers. But also here, I can tell you there's a lot of practical challenges in managing such systems. It's very, very difficult for the smallholders to understand the system and to comply, also to govern the system. It really, we've been analyzing a lot of these kind of systems, and it very much depends on how the system is managed. And there are very good cases, and there are really cases where it's not really going well, although it's certified organic, but it's not really going well. And since we have a really growing market of organic cotton, as Mr. Busquets knows, it's really, really difficult to get this high quality cotton for the companies.
Thank you for sharing your views. Ms. Nanavaty, do you share this assessment of the mentioned techniques? Are some of them also used by SEWA members, or do you think they're feasible to achieve what you mentioned earlier, what is needed, the local supply chains?
I think it's a complex issue, and unless and until the farmers are organized, once the farmers are organized, then designing a system and then bringing it to the farmers becomes much easier and also much more cost effective. So I think if we work out a system with large scale extension and education, and that may make it much more feasible. And that's what our experience has been. And I think bringing in digital technology can also help to an extent.
So the organization of farmers and then also digital solution as the key components that you drew from those points. Mr. Busquets Gonzalez, CNA, if I understand correctly, is already also implementing some digital solutions and traceability approaches. What have your experiences been with those tools? Can you share some of your experiences and how it helps to improve the sustainability and maybe also include the local level more?
Yeah, so it's a tricky process. It's a tricky process because some of the examples that we've seen, and we get across some of those quite on a daily basis. They always have a problem with scalability. It's great. If we do an analogy on something else, it's easy now. It's feasible to create something, let's say, in the lab, right? The difficult thing is to transfer this, let's say, thing that you have been able to create in the lab and create it on the, on a massive production or et cetera, et cetera. So that's the same situation. We can find examples of great ways of trace, but are not as scalable, or there still needs some development to be able to be scaled, in the short future. And I think that what we're trying to do is we're trying to work on a, let's say, cooperation and collaboration setup. We basically work under the Fashion for Good Center, which is based in Amsterdam. And what basically it does is try to put together all of those, innovators that are, that have great ideas, but they still don't know how to scale it up to, to be a kind of a mass product. So that is where we find new ideas, where we can test and try. And I must say that we've tried, DNA traceability testing, et cetera, and let's say at the moment it's not mature enough. We're confident that the time will pass and a few years, and technology is really increasing, on a great scale lately, and but we will be able to scale up this process. But at the moment, some of them are still tricky. So we have done some pilots here and there, and the outcomes are quite promising. But still, we cannot say, we have found out a way that we'll be able to trace all of our products. Just like a little example, we were hearing cotton production, but cotton production is just one element, right? Then it's, then it's spinning and it's yarning, and so all of this process needs to be scaled, and the same tool that you want to use needs to work on the whole entire process. So that's where we're still figuring out how to really scale up properly on the entire supply chain.
So traceability is a tool that still needs some more development to actually include all aspects of the value chain. Ms. Wahidi, you also mentioned before that there are being, the green button is being reformed and new instruments are being included. So are those approaches that we talked about, the traceability or other, also incorporated into those already existing tools? And can you share some of those experience maybe?
Yes, thank you very much. Definitely. This is what we said in the beginning before we kicked off with the green button, that we will first start and we will not come up with a Swiss Army knife as it's usually done in Germany. So yeah, working till you have a perfect product. But we wanted to start with the first, with tier 1 that we covered with the first version of the green button, but we will go deeper now down the line on the one hand, and on the other hand, and this is something that's very important as a development actor, we are working on complex problems like living income and living wages, and we will definitely ask companies that apply for the green button to show their efforts in that regard, because this is exactly what I was talking about previously, especially the subject of living income and living wages. It's nothing that a company alone can tackle. So we need a tripartite exchange. The ILO plays an important role in these different countries, but we would like to incentivize those companies who come up with solutions, who take part in partnership initiatives like with the textiles partnership and also with the green button, so that you somehow have a good feeling as a consumer by choosing products that are labeled with the green button, and you sort of have this mantra in mind: imperfection, maybe somehow also part of the perfection, because these businesses show that they would like to do something more than the average, more than what a legally binding regulation would do, because especially living income is nothing that you can sort of regulate and set out in laws, but we need definitely the voluntary approaches from the various businesses. And I would like to strongly support one point that Ms. Nanavaty was referring to, is the organization of farmers, and not only farmers, but workers on the ground. Now I'm using again this term, in the global south. I think this is very, very important. Just like we demand businesses to create a leverage, I think it's extremely important for workers to come together, create a leverage, and have a stronger voice for their needs on the ground. So strong support for that point. And as BMZ, we will definitely support these kind of initiatives. And I encourage SEWA and Ms. Nanavaty to keep on pushing for that agenda. And especially when it comes to women's rights that are mostly affected in the textiles industry, be it in tier 1 or be it at the farmers level. Yeah, that was the second point that I wanted to stress.
Yeah, you basically already handed over to Ms. Nanavaty, who was also part of the Global Commission on the Future of Work with the International Labour Organization, the ILO, and other national and regional committees. Ms. Nanavaty, what opportunities do you see at these levels to increase the sustainability of supply chains?
Yeah, I fully agree as what Ms. Wahidi is referring to, that living wages or living income or minimum living income for the workers or for the farmers. But I think that can only be ensured, and social protection only works and supply chains become sustainable only when the livelihoods are also protected and sustained. And I think therefore as you mentioned, as Mrs. Wahidi mentioned about a tripartite mechanism, what is really needed is to create a livelihood recovery and resilience fund. I think the companies, the governments, and the unions or the workers' organizations, everybody needs to contribute and build a livelihood recovery and resilience fund. And that is what then would guarantee a certain minimum income. They can bounce back to, you know, the climate shocks, the market shocks that the farmers have always been facing. And then only I think we would be able to make the supply chains more fairer and more sustainable. And then the consumers also become much more aware, and then it's an informed choice that the consumer can make.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Nanavaty. Very interesting insights from all of you, dear panelists. Looking at the time, we unfortunately have to end the discussion here. Thank you for your fruitful inputs, which elaborated on alternative instruments to reduce negative external effects along supply chains and fairly distribute profits. I'm sure that there are still more questions on this rich topic, and we have already collected some from our audience during the whole discussion. So now Ruth Meissner will address those questions to the panel.
Yeah, welcome to the Q&A sessions. I want to remind you, our dear audience, that you can pose any question you have to our panelists in the Q&A section, and remind that you have the possibility to vote the questions you like most. And as from what I can see so far, we have so many questions yet, and I would like to start with you, Ms. Nanavaty, because it's about the producer perspective. You have mentioned the importance of farmer-owned supply chains. Which measures needs to be taken in order to strengthen the role of farmers, and who has to take action? And there's a second question also from that context. In your opinion, what needs to be done so that small cotton farmers can overcome poverty? What can be done at the side of business, German and European legislation, but also regulation in India? What is realistic?
Two things. One is that in order to bring the farmers more and integrate them higher into the value chain, I think we everybody needs to take a bolder step that how do we start building or investing in building farmers organizations and building their capacities in having systems and processes, so that transparency is very much, and it becomes much more economical also. It will not be that cost intensive or capital intensive as well. So that's one aspect. And, you know, unless the farmers start ginning themselves and then spinning, and then, you know, if the companies identify processors who then directly work with these farmers organizations, I think nothing like that. That would be a fairer, just, equitable, and bring a dignified life to the farmers. And that answers the second question also, that farmers would have a fairer return, which Wahidi has been saying, that, you know, a living income. And I think farmers would be able to jump out of poverty, coupled with social protection measures. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Said that farmer organization is the key to change that. The next couple of questions relates to the customer perspective. So, Mr. Busquets, there's somebody who seems to have contact with your company, because this person is commenting, from a conversation with C&A, we learned that your experience with labels was that customers avoided sustainability labeled products because they thought they would pay more because of the label. Could you elaborate a bit on customer trials for sustainable product lines? If customer behavior is changing, and maybe strategies to achieve change.
Well, I'm not aware exactly of what the comment is about, but what we have done is several tests in order to understand how consumers understand the messages. And what we have gotten, and again, this is in general terms, what we have gotten is that the topic is extremely complicated, and that the consumer usually wants to understand, let's say, clear concepts, And then we're entering into this like gray zone of how you can make, let's say, a clear, simple statement that is not understood as greenwashing, because that's definitely not the route that we want to go through, right? So, and so what we have decided to do is that there will be a label. So just, you know, at the moment, 70% of our products are more sustainable. So how we understand more sustainable? So we understand that are more sustainable than the regular usual practices. Is that where we want to be? Well, no, we want to be, you know, more. We want to be more percentage. We want to be even more sustainable. But that's like, you know, that's a journey, and how we express that. So we incorporate labels. I think that labels are important to inform consumer. We think that the label is an entry point. Now technology allows us, you know, with QR codes, with, you know, website information, et cetera, to provide, let's say, a first layer of information. This product that you're buying is more sustainable than the regular product. Why? For, you know, for this element. If you want to know more information about what does it mean, here is the information on the website. So then we have, let's say, a second layer of information, much more detailed, much more directed to those consumers that actually want to know more, that are interested in the topic, that eventually might have some, you know, additional questions. So that process is there. We really want to be even more transparent. We really want to be even able to provide, let's say, a full value chain, and be able to provide to the consumer, you know, where the product was made, you know, what is the, you know, what are the factories that have been included, and so on. That's a process that we are into. It's a journey, but definitely what we have understood, it is sometimes the message on sustainability and what does it mean, it's difficult to be sent across to the regular consumer.
Yeah, you said a lot about transparency. And actually, Mr. Schader, this is a little bit in contrast to what you said at the beginning, because you said that whether we should bother the general population with all those informations, and what would you reply to the ones that criticize this statement as elitist? Shouldn't one make supply chains more transparent, so it is more possible for consumers who want to know more to get access to those informations? How would you react to that?
I think certainly it's to be appreciated if companies engage in supply chain transparency and also manage their supply chains more sustainably with respect to social and environmental issues. So this is clear. But we can see a trend that companies, also retailers, like if you think about the big retailers, food retailers in Germany, they tend also then to say, okay, we to provide the information, you can choose the cheap meat or the expensive meat, and the consumers, they choose the cheap meat. So we have to offer the cheap meat. And I think this is the problem, that if we get this more transparency, then companies are also giving away the responsibility they have to the consumers. And this is what I want to avoid. It's not, I mean, we cannot expect ordinary people, to voluntarily pay more for these kind of things. There will be still people like us who are willing to do that, but there are many people who don't have the capacity to do that for many reasons. And we need to, if we want to solve our problems, we need to provide a solution for these people too. And this means that the sustainable option is the cheaper option, or at least that we can internalize the externalities that you nicely presented in the beginning. This is the key, I think, that consumers don't have to think about this trade-off. Do I pay more and be sustainable, or do I pay less? No, I want the sustainable option to be the cheapest. And this is where policy comes in. And I know that Mrs. Wahidi is sharing this in completely, and I know that there is this problem with the other ministries and the competences. I understand that, but I think still it's the role of policy to provide, let's say, a framework for companies to act in a way that they can earn more money with the more sustainable option, and for consumers that they have an economic choice that is also sustainable. And this is in the moment not the case, and here is the key of the problem.
Yeah, thank you for elaborating on this. Actually, there's another question which is direct exactly from the same context to you, Ms. Wahidi. So sustainable fashion is often expensive. Would it be possible to subsidize sustainable fashion, especially for low-income households?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And it occurs a couple of times, it comes over and over again. There is one thing that I would like to clarify at the beginning. Cheap doesn't necessarily mean that it's not sustainable. The concept of fast fashion may not be sustainable ecologically because a lot of resources are actually needed to create that loads of fashion that are actually put on the market by fast fashion companies. But at the end of the day, and I was visiting a lot of these producing countries, it doesn't necessarily mean that the company doesn't comply with its due diligence. I've been seeing factories in Asia, in East Africa, where you have one line producing for a fast fashion company, the other line, the ladies are working on garments for a bigger brand, a luxury brand, and so on and so forth. And they're all working in one building. So at the end of the day, it's the same working conditions for all of them. But what we definitely need to keep in mind, and there was another question in the chat as well, and I tried to answer that as well, because this is a very important input. It's not about consuming, and even, consuming even more. What about the existing products that we already have? And someone was posing the question about secondhand. We definitely support secondhand clothing. But what we more than that do is actually give consumers an orientation about their consuming habits. And do I really need to run after every trend? And there are fast fashion companies that come up with 25 collections a year. And I ask myself, like every 2 weeks, what kind of new trend do I have to follow? So just to be aware that with every decision that you take, with every garment that you buy, at the beginning of this value chain, there is a person that has to live from that income. And most of the time, these people are coming from the global south, again, this word. In that regard, I would a bit disagree with Mr. Schader. I absolutely agree with you that we cannot put all the responsibility on the consumers, but I think we have a shared responsibility here. So everyone has a responsibility when it comes to consumption. So of course I can decide whether I would like to take the cheaper meat in that regard, which is most probably not sustainable, if you say so, or do I take the other meat that is somehow labeled or where I can trace, and I don't want to say that's the higher price. I don't know about that. So of course I take a proactive decision as a consumer, and what we have to do as politics or actors in that area is to give that orientation to the consumers at the end of the day. But I have to clarify that the consumers have the tiniest responsibility in that regard. Of course, politics and businesses are in the lead to show that whatever we do within supply chains is sustainable. So again, it's most probably a smart mix of actors, not only the measures. So even the actors have to work together, businesses with politics, with consumers, with trade unions. We didn't talk about that today. And a very important and last point from my point of view, we didn't talk about grievance mechanisms and remedy. There is no guarantee that we won't have human rights violations along the value chain. And I'm sure Ms. Nanavaty is experiencing that every day in India. But what we definitely have to ensure, so businesses don't need to come up with a guarantee, but they have to have a system, a risk-based system that somehow complies to that. whenever something happens, a human rights violation, we need a grievance mechanisms, and there needs to be a remedy mechanism as well for the people on the ground. So this was the last one that we didn't touch upon today, but this is very important as a development actor for us to stress.
Yeah, I actually would love to take that to Ms. Nanavaty. Would you like to react? And maybe we can connect that to another questions from the audience. If the costs of certifications are an issue for the farmers.
Yeah, sure. I think I fully agree to what Ms. Wahidi has been referring to, and on the grievance redressal and consumer protection mechanisms also, and that also applies to at the production side as well. So I think we need to have a kind of a social contract that needs to be worked out. And what role can the unions play? What role can the workers' organizations play in that? And I think if we look at how many different layers are there, and if you look at the garment supply chain in countries like India and in Bangladesh, it is like subcontracting. So I think it's the 6th or the 7th or the 8th level layers are there, and that's why how do you then make a product cheap? So that the way it is worked out is that this is the end price of the product, and then the backward calculation. So actually the workers, the producers, who are the wheels of the pyramid in any country, they are sort of, the ones who take the largest hit, because that's where then the lowest of the price has to be worked out. And I think somehow we do need to work out a mechanism, and I don't think it's not doable or it's impossible, but there can be, and our experience has shown that local decentralized supply chains do offer a solution. There's a need to study that by the companies as well, and by the agencies as well. And definitely I think fair trade certification or organic certification is still a far cry, because there aren't many agencies. There's not that kind of an enabling environment as well. The criteria, which are the standards which are set, are very, very stringent and difficult.
Thank you, Ms. Nanavaty. And from what I can see, we have also some critical voices in the audience, and I would love to direct the last questions to you, Mr. Busquets. Do you see the danger of losing customers if you move away from non-certificate dumping price products, and will you value sustainability over profit? So this is like a tricky question for the end.
That's a very good question. I'm assuming that he's talking about social dumping, and of course related with price dumping. So I think I started saying that the jeans that I was wearing, by the way, I mean, it's a great story about how the jeans were made, and it seems not really difficult to set up to create jeans, but actually there's a lot of story behind that I'm pretty sure that Christian knows about. But I said they're not cheap, they're not expensive. So I would absolutely not connect cheap product with non-sustainable products, as Mrs. Wahidi was saying. There's a lot of things. Again, that would be too simplistic, too easy. Then the world would be, so easy to solve. There are elements of economies of scale. There are elements of willingness of the companies on how to do things. And then all of those elements are incorporated on how a product is being produced and is being presented to the final customer. So that is clear, not the way that we want to go. What we need to understand is how we incorporate all of these negative externalities that we were talking, without, let's say, creating a process where we're not able to provide, good products to our customers. And this is the the fine line that we have to find out. I think that scalability is one way of decreasing product costs and margins. So it's something that we will see more and more and more in the future. What we definitely are seeing, and we have been pushing for it in the last few years, is that sustainability needs to become the new normal. We're still not there. But we need trendsetters, and we want to put ourselves as one of the trendsetters to say, hey, things can be done in a different way. And we have been able to put in the market more than 4 million products, cradle to cradle certified, with no price increase, to show that it's possible. That it means it's a little bit more complicated. It means that you have to put more process in place, but it's possible. So that's also something, not only doing the right thing, but showing that the right thing can be done in a proper manner.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think that have been some really nice last words. It's possible. I think this optimism is something we should take out of this panel. And looking at the clock, we unfortunately have to end the audience questions here. Thanks to the audience for such diverse and interesting questions. And I also want to thank to Sari Luisa Jung and Aisosa Eraun, who helped me to manage all the questions from you. Yeah, you have seen that 2 hours are not nearly enough to fully explore this topic. And yeah, with this, back to you, Deborah Kali.
So after having answered some of your questions, dear audience, we would like to ask you again about your opinion in another Mentimeter, which relates to the one in the beginning. To access it, please click on the link now posted in the chat or go to menti.com and add the code 523-63127. This time the question is, which factor or factors do you see as leading to the goal of making value chains sustainable? You may again tick multiple answers. The first option is due diligence laws. Next, you can choose labels and certification. Then there's a smart mix, so a combination of both. And alternatives such as participatory guarantee systems or traceability. Finally, you can tick none of the above or others. I will give you a minute to answer. So as we can see, a small majority thinks that a smart mix is the best solution, followed by a tie of the due diligence law and traceability approaches. And then also very close together, we have labels and certification and alternatives such as the PGS. And yeah, hardly anyone thinks that there's none or other possibilities. So now that we've heard from the audience which instruments they deem most effective to improve sustainability along the supply chain, to wrap up the discussion, we would like to give back the word to our panelists for a final statement on the following question. Labels, due diligence laws, or another of the discussed alternative, what would an ideal future of sustainable supply chains look like? Would you like to start, Ms. Nanavaty?
I think the future supply chains, when we all are working on building a new economic pathway after the COVID, we need to be innovative and come up with a smart mix, which is fair and equitable, and everybody feels that it's a fair share for all. That's what I think. So that the economy becomes a nurturing economy and not the current state of affairs that we are facing. Thank you.
Mr. Schader, would you like to go next?
Yes, I think obviously it's the term smart mix is key here. We need to have it needs to be a policy mix, and it needs to be taking on board all actors, including private industry and consumers. I don't want to be misunderstood. The consumers have a responsibility, but businesses should not say, okay, the consumers say like this, and then our responsibility is over, to make this clear. But I would also like to stress the importance of trade policy here. I think we don't need to talk, I mean, supply chains, yes, but the key can be also trade policy. And what Mr. Busquets said, to get the governments, the administration in the producing countries on board, and to also make them partly responsible. What happens in their countries is key. And yesterday I talked with a legal expert on this kind of WTO issues, and she was also really stressing that the potential here for having WTO compliant trade agreements with social and environmental components, it's not yet fully explored and fully used. So this is a key, I think.
Mr. Busquets, you are nodding. Would you like to go next?
Yes, because that was something that I had in mind to put the question to the audience, is how they see trade agreements playing an important role. It's something, as it has been said, not fully unleashed, and it has huge potential, and it connects, I think, many dots, right? Consumers are also citizens. Citizens are voters. Voters make choice and decisions when they vote, in the same way that when they go to a store and they buy a clothes. But when they vote, they also do make a choice that has, this halo effect on trade policies that we want to see at WTO level as well, but also at the EU level. And I think that we should not, we should be able to connect all of the dots, empower ourselves, who we are, and how can we, push ourselves. If we really want to change things, we have the ability to do so in all of the actions that we do on a daily basis. But I think that having this wider picture that we have been putting our focus in certain elements in the past makes sense. But I think now it's I think that we're mature as citizens, at least in the European Union, enough to see the connections that we are empowered to take, and trade agreements is something that we would like to see unleashed very soon, with social agenda also included there.
Then finally, over to you, Ms. Wahidi.
Yeah, you see me all smiles, because the smart mix was obviously mentioning a couple of times, and this is what we are actually striving for. And trade, of course, one very important issue. I think that's really that might be the game changer, especially when it comes to cooperation with, let's say, difficult counterparts. And I would maybe summarize it for me with the 3 C's. That's what I usually do after discussions. The first C is the complexity of value chains. I think we should definitely keep that in mind, that it's not easy, and it's not like, an easy task to fulfill. So make complexity less complex, maybe, by more traceability, more transparency. The second thing, which is important for us, and which came out today as well, is cooperation. Cooperation between the various stakeholders, of course, with businesses, to create a leverage, and of course, on the ground to make that voice even louder of the workers on the ground. And the last thing is the last C is the communication between consumers, and also make it more touchable for consumers. What does it mean actually when we talk about sustainability? What does it mean when I choose to buy this product and not the other one? And to literally see the person on the ground who is working to create that product. I think that the more we handle to bring these 2 worlds together, the more the understanding for a more just and sustainable world, value chain, maybe pressed. So yeah, I would like to finish with the 3 C's. Thank you very much also to both of you for the excellent moderation, and of course to the panelists.
Great, thank you all for sharing these future outlooks with us. They nicely sum up our discussion today on the true value of clothes. We talked about the effectiveness of labels, due diligence laws, and other ways to avoid human rights violations and environmental destructions along the supply chain. Thereby, we also addressed ways to eliminate power and ensure a fair distribution of profits. Dear panelists, we really appreciate you taking the time to sit on our panel today. It was a great pleasure to hear your opinions. We would also like to thank the speakers of our second video, Vitun Panyakur from Greennet Thailand and Daniel and Rose from Manobi, Africa. And finally, this event would not have been possible without our great team that you can see here in the picture. So we have Yasmin Ahmed, Aisosa Eraon, Sari Luisa Jung, Ricky Klingeler, Cornelius Krüger, and Flavia Mara. We hope to have sparked your interest in this topic of sustainable supply chains in the textile sector. I'm happy to inform you that after the event, there will be a briefing paper which is posted on the SLE website in due time. You can also sign up for receiving it by leaving us your email address in the end of our evaluation survey. In any case, it would be great if you could leave us your feedback on today's event in the survey. The link is posted in the chat. And finally, as this was the last of our 3 panel discussions of this year's EPDTs, we would like to give a final thanks to the Böll-Stiftung, who hosted this event together with the SLE. Dear audience, we appreciate your participation in this event and wish to see you all again next year, hopefully in person. Goodbye and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you very much.